Clive Barker's ABARAT. Where we left off, Chapter 3, Doodle. The reason I ended up with this book is because of this bookmark. And, yeah. So Chapter 3 is called Doodle. Oops, two of them. Miss Schwartz, Candy's history teacher, was not in a pleasant mood at the best of times, but today her mood was fouler than usual. As she went around the classroom, returning the project papers on Chickentown, only her few favorite students, who were usually boys, earned anything close to good marks. Everyone else was being criticized. But nothing the rest of the class had faced compared with Miss Schwartz's attack on Candy's paper. Yeah, let's get comfy. Chapter 3, Doodle. Okay, so, facts, Candy Quackenbush, the woman said, tossing Candy's paper about Henry Murkett's demise down on her desk. I asked for facts. And what do you give me? Those are facts, miss. Don't answer back, Miss Schwartz snapped. These are not facts. These are morbid pieces of gossip, nothing more. This work, like most of your work, is worthless. But I was in the room in the Comfort Tree Hotel, she said. I saw Henry Murkett's sextant. Are you hopelessly gullible, said Schwartz, or are you just plain stupid? Every hotel has some kind of ridiculous ghost story. Can't you tell the difference between fact and fiction? But Miss Schwartz, I swear these are facts. You get an F, Candy. Ugh. That's not fair, Candy protested. Miss Schwartz's upper lip began to twitch, a sure sign that she was going to start yelling soon. Don't talk back to me, she said, her volume rising. If you don't stop indulging in these dim-witted fantasies of yours and start doing some real work... Fuck. It's been 2 weeks. You're going to fail this class completely. And I'll personally see you held back a year for your laziness and your insolence. There was a lot of tittering from the back of the class, where the coven of Candy's enemies, led by Deborah Hackbarth, all sat. Miss Schwartz threw them a silencing look, which worked. But Candy knew they were smiling behind their hands, pressing notes back and forth about Candy's humiliation. Why can't you be normal, Miss Schwartz said. Give me work like this from Ruth Ferris. She leafed through the pages. Miss Schwartz held up the paper so that everybody could see what an exemplary piece of work Ruth had done. You see these graphs? Miss Schwartz was flicking through the pages of colored graphs Ruth had thoughtfully provided as appendices to her paper. You know what they're all about? Well, do you, Candy? Let me guess, said Candy. Chickens? Yes, chickens. Ruth wrote about the #1 industry in our community, chickens. Maybe that's because her father is the factory manager, Candy said, throwing a perfect Miss R. Ferris a sour look. She knew everybody knew, including Miss Schwartz, that Ruth's pretty little charts and flowing diagrams, from egg to chicken nugget, had been copied out of her father's glossy brochures for Applebaum Farms. Who cares about chickens, Candy said. Chickens are the lifeblood of this town, Candy Quackenbush. Without chickens, your father wouldn't have a job. He doesn't have a job, Miss Schwartz, said Deborah. Oh, well, he likes his beer too much. All right, that's enough, Deborah, said Miss Schwartz, sensing that things were getting out of hand. You see how disruptive you are, Candy? What did I do? Candy protested. We waste far too much time on you in class. Far too much. She stopped speaking because her eyes had aligned on Candy's workbook. She snatched it up off the desk. For some reason, Candy had started drawing wavy pictures on the cover of her book a couple of days before, her hand simply making the marks without her mind consciously instructing it to do so. What is this? Miss Schwartz demanded, flipping through the pages of the workbook. The interior was decorated in the same way as the cover. Tightly set lines, hundreds of them, waving up and down all over the page. It's bad enough you bring these morbid stories of yours into school, Miss Schwartz was saying. Now you're defacing school property? It's just a doodle, Candy said. Good Lord, are you going crazy? There are pages and pages of this rubbish. Miss Schwartz held the workbook at arm's length as though it might infect her. What do you think you're doing? What are these? For some reason, as Miss Schwartz stared down at her, Candy thought of Henry Murkett sitting in room 19 on that distant Christmas Eve waiting for his ship to come in. Thinking of him, she realized she'd been drawing so obsessively in her notebook. It's the sea, she said quietly. It's what? Said Miss Schwartz, her voice oozing contempt. It's the sea. I was drawing the sea. The artwork is ridiculous. Do you see all them fucking chickens? From Chicken Town. And then there's the sea. Were you indeed? Well, it may look like a sea to you, but it looks like 2 weeks in detention to me. There was a little eruption of laughter from the back of the class. This time Miss Schwartz didn't hush it. She simply tossed the defaced workbook into Candy's desk. It was a bad throw. Instead of landing it neatly in front of the disgraced Candy, it skimmed across the desk, taking the paper about Henry Murkett along with several pens, pencils, and a blue plastic ruler off the other side and onto the floor. The laughter halted. There was a hush while one of the pens rolled to a halt. Then Miss Schwartz said, I want you to pick all that trash up. Candy didn't reply, at least not at first. She remained in her seat, not moving a muscle. Did you hear me, Candy Quackenbush? The Hackbarth clique was in hog heaven. They watched with smirks on their faces as Candy sat in her seat, still refusing to move. Candy, Miss Schwartz. I heard you, Miss Schwartz. Then pick them up. I didn't knock them off the desk, Miss Schwartz. I beg your pardon. I said I didn't knock them off the desk. You did. So I think you should pick the things up. All the blood had drained from Miss Schwartz's face. The only color that remained was purple of the shadows under her eyes. Get up, Miss Schwartz. You heard me. I said get up. I want you down to the principal's office right now. Candy's heart was beating furiously and her hands were clammy, but she wasn't going to let Miss Schwartz or any of her enemies in the class see that she was nervous. She was irritated with herself for letting Miss Schwartz escalate this stupid shutdown. Maybe the principal would be more sympathetic to Candy's researches than Miss Schwartz, but Candy doubted that, since she'd even get to show him her paper. All Miss Schwartz would want to talk about is Candy's insolence. Unfortunately, it was a subject that the principal took very seriously. Only a month ago, he had talked to the whole school about that very subject. There would be a policy of zero tolerance, he told everyone, towards pupils who were disrespectful to teachers. Any student who crossed the line, he said, between civility and rudeness of the kind could expect serious consequences. He had meant what he had said. 2 weeks ago, he had expelled 2 students for what they had called extreme discourtesy toward a teacher. Candy half wondered if there was still time to apologize, but she knew it was lost cause. Miss Schwartz wanted to see Candy squirming in front of the principal, and she wasn't going to let anything keep her from witnessing that. You're still sitting down, Quackenbush, the woman said. What did I tell you? Well, go to the principal's office, Miss Schwartz. So move your lazy behind. Candy bit her tongue and got up. Her chair made an ugly squeal as she pushed it back. There was more nervous laughter from 1 or 2 places around the class, but mostly there was silence, even from the loquacious Deborah Hackbarth. Nobody wanted to draw Miss Schwartz's venomous attention in their direction right now. And pick up your workbook, Quackenbush, Miss Schwartz said. I want you to explain your defacing a school property to the principal. Candy didn't argue. She dutifully went down on her haunches and gathered up all the things that Miss Schwartz had knocked off her desk. The pencils, the pens, the workbook, and the paper on Henry Murkett. Give that stupid paper and the workbook to me, Miss Schwartz said. I'm not going to destroy them, Candy protested. Just give them to me, Miss Schwartz demanded with her voice almost cracking with rage. Candy put the pens and pencils down on her desk and gave the book and paper to Miss Schwartz. Then, without looking around at the rest of the class, she made her way out to the door. God, I really have an issue with glare. Once she was outside the classroom in the eerie hunch of the corridor, she felt a peculiar sense of relief. She knew she should be feeling full of regret and self-recrimination, but the truth was that a significant part of her was glad she said what she had said. Miss Schwartz had picked on her one too many times. She was a ridiculous woman anyways, with her endless snide remarks and her ludicrous obsession with chickens. Who cares about chickens, Candy said, her voice echoing down the empty passageway. The door at the end of the corridor was open. Through it, she could see that the sunlit yard and beyond the yard was a school gate and the street. It would be so easy, she thought, just to walk out of here right now and never have to hear Miss Schwartz pontificate on the glories of chicken farming ever again. What was she thinking? She couldn't do that. She'd be expelled for certain. So what, said a voice in the back of her head. Just walk out. Go on, walk out. For some reason, the doodles that she had drawn on her workbook came back into her mind. Only this time, instead of being black lines on gray recycled paper, they were bright in her mind. Very bright. In all kinds of colors. The way the sun appeared in your mind if you looked at it for a moment and then closed your eyes. Dozens of little suns, green, red, and gold. Then colors, too, that you couldn't even name. That was the way lines looked in Candy's mind's eye. And they were moving. The wavy lines were rolling across the darkness inside of her skull, rolling and breaking, the brilliant colors bursting into aberasks of white and silver. Behind her, she heard familiar sounds, the click, click, click of Mrs. Schwartz's heels. What are you still doing in the corridor, Candy Quackenbush? She yelled down the corridor. I told you to report to the principal's office. Everyone in the class along the passage had heard the woman, Candy knew. Tomorrow she'd be the butt of every idiotic joke. Candy glanced over her shoulder. Miss Schwartz was gaining on her, her arms crossed in front of her bosom. Held captive behind them was the evidence of her prosecution. Candy's workbook and the paper on Henry Murkett. Poor Henry Murkett, sitting in that cold little room in the hotel, waiting with his sextant for a ship to come and find him. Checking the stars, consulting his watch, waiting and waiting until he could stand the wait no longer. Candy looked away from Miss Schwartz, her gaze returning to the rectangle of brightness at the end of the corridor, and still the lines rolled in her mind's eye, rolled and broke, rolled and broke. Where do you think you're going, Miss Schwartz demanded. Candy's feet knew even if her brain was a little slow at catching up with the idea, they were taking her out of here. You head straight to the principal's office, Miss Schwartz called after her. Candy didn't really hear the woman's words very clearly now. The lines in her head were making a sound, like a dim of white noise on an untuned television. It washed away Miss Schwartz's demands. Candy Quackenbush, come back here. Her shrill voice was being heard from one end of the school to the other, but the person to whom they were directed was deaf to them. Out she went, with Miss Schwartz pursuing her, inventing new threats and demands to throw in Candy's direction. Candy took no notice of them. She stepped over the threshold and out into the bright morning. A little portion of her mind still said, Candy, turn around. What are you doing? They'll expel you for certain. But the voice was too small to convince her feet. At the threshold, she broke into a run. It took her 30 seconds to reach the school gate and to get out into the street. A few students caught sight of her, and she made her departure. Those who knew her said they'd never seen Candy Quackenbush looking any happier. And that is the end of chapter 3. And it ended on page 34. Hey, have a beautiful day. Boop, boop. Thanks for watching.